Hello everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be using the Miss Anya birthday stamp set from the Greeting Farm. This came out a while ago and I just really wanted to make something with it. So a couple of months ago actually, I made this card specifically for a live stream for my premium members. I saved the footage and here we are today. I'm going to share it with you. So if you would like to see any portion of this video in its entirety with lots more explanation, especially when it comes to the watercoloring, check out my premium membership. You can join for as low as $5 a month, and you can watch this card being made from start to finish without any editing or any cuts. So I took the images from the stamp set and I stamped them onto some scratch paper, cut them out just so I could kind of arrange the scene and know exactly what my plan was for my card. While I was doing that, I figured out that I wanted it to be a square card, 4.5 by 4.5. So I taped all of these images down to a 4.5 by 4.5 square. And now I'm going to start stamping my scene. I decided instead of doing a bunch of masking that I would instead have the presents and the little banner and the greeting all be on a piece of watercolor paper. And then I'll stamp the girl with the cupcake on a separate piece and she'll be cut out and popped up off the surface of the card. I'm going to be doing no line watercoloring today, so I'm using Distress ink and the color Antique Linen. This is like my preferred ink for no line watercoloring. I know there are some inks out there on the market. I know there's one from Hero Arts called Contour Ink. There's a few from a bunch of different companies. I find that those inks work best with markers, with like alcohol marker coloring. For watercoloring, I still prefer to use Antique Linen. For this banner that I'm stamping, it only has 3 little pennants on it, or 3 little buntings. So I actually repeat stamped this and kind of changed the angle of my stamping so that I could have 2 little swooshes coming across my scene. And this worked really well. I decided to switch to an acrylic block for this. It was just a little bit cumbersome to have to move it around in a MISTI, and it seemed a whole lot faster and easier just to use an acrylic block. The paper I'm using today is actually Strathmore Bristol paper. It's the paper that I prefer to use when I'm going to be painting with my Caran brush markers. The markers themselves work great on regular watercolor paper, but I think I get a smoother blend on top of Bristol paper, and Bristol paper is super, super smooth, so it's great for no line watercoloring because you're not having to deal with any weird texture. So when I started to paint this girl, I started out with the color Henna. I'm actually using Caran markers today. I don't know that I've ever done no line watercoloring with Caran markers in the past. I think I may have tried with Zigs many years ago, but not with the Caran brush markers. And so I took it as a challenge to do that. And lo and behold, I found a marker that was completely dried out. I've had this set of markers for a long, long time. That really surprised me. So thankfully I was able to order just that one replacement marker directly from Caran. But that was the color Henna, which I had planned to use as the base color. Instead, I used number 282, which was a little more red than I was looking for. But then as I brought in Cocoa on top, it kind of neutralized the skin tone a little bit. I had this kind of skin tone imagined in my head, and it was more of a brown, not red. So that's why I wanted to neutralize this red. But if you're going for a more red tone, I think 282 would actually be a really great color for that. So when I brought in Cocoa, that really darkened up the shadows right on her hairline and under her neck and things like that. I then brought in a nice bright magenta pink, and at this point I moved from applying the marker directly to my project. I moved to putting the marker on an acrylic block and picking it up with a paintbrush. I stopped at this point and decided to fill in her face. Sometimes it can look a little bit unnerving to see the whole image of the person or the character coming together and their face isn't defined. So as soon as I have that painted, I like to go ahead and grab a marker and just define the face. So like I said, I'm picking up the color from an acrylic block, and in this way Using Karen markers is very, very similar to using like distress inks or traditional watercolors. I find that, picking it up from an acrylic block with a paintbrush, while the medium is different because it is an ink from a marker, the application is very familiar. So if you're doing some very detailed painting and you're struggling with maybe the larger tip of a marker, maybe try putting that ink down onto an acrylic block and then pick it up with a very fine tipped brush. I found that worked a lot better. For the hair, I went with a very familiar method. It's kind of the same that I do with my marker coloring, where I put down a lighter shade and have it kind of pulled from the ends of each segment of hair. So you've got like a darker shadow at each end of that segment, if that makes sense. And then you want it to sort of fade off in the center, and that creates the shine or the glare of the highlight on the hair. For the brown shade for this, I didn't have quite the right brown that I wanted, so I ended up mixing a little bit of black with the brown that I used initially just to darken it up and get a darker brown shade, and that worked really well. So I brought it in and, like I said, concentrating this darker shade on the far ends of each segment, and then having it sort of flick and fade toward the center. And that helps preserve that center area, which makes it look like shiny hair. I think it looks really cool this way. So I continued on kind of painting each section. I really think this tiny brush, this is a size 2 Escada brush. It's a Prado brush. It has a very fine point. So for these little tiny little hairs, it worked really, really well. And especially up near the part in her hair, I kept the part in her hair very light. I didn't want it to get too dark. I think you could make it dark because that is where a shadow would be, but I think it worked out well like this. So I did bring in a little bit of a warmer shade. I'm using copper brown. I believe this is the initial color that I used on her skin that I toned down with the cocoa. But I just wanted to bring a little bit of that warmth back to her hair. It was looking a little bit too cool toned for what I had in mind. So I brought that in. And you'll notice that I didn't put as much on the left-hand side of her head. So eventually I'll come back and fix that. For her dress, I wanted her dress to be purple, but I just know from previous experience that painting a kind of an underlayer of a bright pink, of a bright magenta, really gives a purple item that you're painting a lot of dimension and color. So I did an underpainting of the pink, and then I'm going to go in with purple, and you're going to see that, the purple in those darkest shadowed areas really helps her dress read as purple, but in those lighter shades or those lighter areas, you're going to get that pink kind of glowing through. I think it looks really, really neat. It's one of those kind of features of using Karen markers that I think is just beautiful. The color is so bright and vibrant, and I wanted to take advantage of that while painting her dress. So I painted the purple all along her dress, and then using that very, very fine tip on my brush, I came in and added some very thin pinstripes on her dress. At this point, it was starting to look like pajamas to me, so I decided to bring in a little dot right on those vertical lines just to give it a little bit of a pattern. I think it looks so super cute, and I love adding texture and patterns to textiles on characters or people when I'm painting them. I think it adds a lot to the image. I like to do this specifically when I'm doing holiday cards or winter cards. When a character is wearing a scarf, I think doing these like really thin pinstripes can look like cable knitting on a scarf. I think it looks really, really neat. I painted the cupcake box as well as the boots. And then for the boots, I decided to put some gold on the buckles. And since I had my Yuli watercolor paints out, I decided why not add a little bit more. So I add a little more of that gold to give her a gold hoop earring. I think she looks so stylish. And then I grabbed kind of a pink metallic shade from that same set of paints from Yuli watercolors and added some polka dots to the cupcake box. Like I said, I did fix like the warmth on the left-hand side of her face, or her head, I should say. And then it was time to cut her out. Remember, she's going to be popped up off the background of the card, so I needed to cut her out. And I realized that that window in the cupcake box would not show the scene behind her unless I cut out that center. So I used a craft knife to cut out the center, cut the rest of her out with scissors, and then painted the edges with a black brush tip marker. And that black marker on the edges just really gives it a finished look. For the background, I came in with, I think, 4 or 5 colors for the gifts along the bottom and also that banner up at the top. Very simple coloring on those. I didn't add a bunch of additional shading. I just used the same color on each one. And then for the ground, I came in with a gray shade and just added that shadow right underneath the presents. For the background, I scribbled my pink marker on acrylic block and then brought in a large wash of color with a flat tip or a flat brush, I should say. I think this is a 1/2 inch flat brush. So I just brought that in, kind of getting some texture all along that wall. I wasn't too precious about this because the background is kind of going to fade into the back and the real focal point of the card will be the girl holding the cupcake box. Add a little bit of white gel pen, some dots on some presents, and accentuated those ribbons. And then I brought my entire project to my Misty. I placed the girl on the background. She's not adhered yet. And then used that for placement of my greeting. I'm going to stamp the birthday smiles in black ink. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black. I'm just stamping that directly onto the background of the card. I then took a black marker. This is just a nice thin marker. And I went over the line of my banner as well as adding just some really thin strings for a bow up on that corner. I then created a 5x5 card base and I adhered my background directly to that card using some foam adhesive. This is a top folding card, by the way. And after I adhered that down to the card base, I then put some foam adhesive on the back of the girl with the cupcake, just with some little foam squares. I've peeled off the release paper on those and then pressed her down right on top of the scene. Minimal dimension on this card. I think it should go through the mail quite well. So here's the finished card. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know I didn't go into a ton of detail for the painting. So like I said before, if you're interested in seeing this from beginning to end in real time, check out my premium membership. There is info down below in the description box, or if you're watching on a mobile device, you can find the join button. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you in another video very soon. Thanks for watching.